So just to be clear, this is what I would do with every pick, and it is not a predictive draft. At number one, I think the pick has to be Bryce Young because the only real issue is that he's a bit undersized, and I'm kind of willing to look past that because he's just been so good at basically every other measure. He has a 91 plus grade by PFF measure in back to back years and a 68 grade when pressured, which is actually a rather predictive measure of how good a college quarterback will be in the pros. In addition to that, he also doesn't struggle to attack over the middle of the field, which would be an issue for most smaller quarterbacks. So I think he's the pick because he can act in structure, and then out of structure, he's almost at a Mahomes level. Though I favor Young, I also respect CJ Stroud greatly as a prospect because he is so good at getting the ball exactly where it needs to be, and he also throws with great anticipation, which you don't see for many college quarterbacks. I am a bit worried that his play under pressure was as poor as it was, as he only had a 44 grade under pressure, but part of me is optimistic that he can improve upon that moving forward because his play under pressure against Georgia, which was the most he was under pressure in his college career, at least from an eye test, was incredibly good. And my hope is when he sees more pressure in the pros than he did in college, he'll continue to get comfortable with it and be able to not struggle with it so much moving forward. Also, as it pertains to the Texans, I actually think they have a rather solid offensive line, and they'll definitely need wide receiver help. So there will be a learning curve for Stroud as he goes from the best offensive line in the nation and also arguably the best playmakers in college to the NFL. But I think the offensive line will be more than good enough. For the Cardinals, I have a defensive player going to them, and you could argue it should be Jalen Carter over Will Anderson, and I would totally respect that, as I do have them rated as equivalent prospects, but I really don't think the Cardinals have a good culture in place, and I try to overlook off the field issues as much as I can, but there is a lot of smoke surrounding Jalen Carter, particularly as he struggled as much as he did at his pro day, which could suggest that he's just not as concerned with football as he should be. So, as a tiebreaker, then I defer to Will Anderson, who I think is a great pick in his own right as well. For the Colts, I really like Anthony Richardson as a fit because Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles. And if you can make Jalen Hurts work as a runner, you should definitely be able to get Anthony Richardson involved as a runner as well. So I like that from a scheme fit. And also, Anthony Richardson just really does have that limitless potential that I think Steichen will be able to help correct some of his issues that deal with his footwork and lead to his poor accuracy. And if that can be improved upon, he could be up there with the very best in the NFL. So I like Anthony Richardson to the Colts quite a bit. At 5, I think Jalen Carter makes all the sense in the world because the Seahawks need defensive line, and the interior is not a glaring need, as Jaron Reed and Draymond Jones are both very solid contributors. They don't really compare to what Carter can be at the pro level, and anything about his character, I think, is a lot more comfortable in Seattle than it would be almost anywhere else because Pete Carroll has reformed so many careers that looked like they were on a downward trajectory, And I don't see why he couldn't do it with Jalen Carter as well, who just could be an incredible player. I think Will Levis makes a ton of sense in Detroit because though Jared Goff was solid this past year, he was not an elite quarterback, and you are still paying him a ton of money. So Levis gives you a lot more flexibility, as I think he could be better than Goff within a year or two in the pros, and he's also going to be a lot cheaper. And in addition to that, you can get rid of Goff as early as next year with basically no cap ramifications. So if Levis hits, he can be your guy and it'll be a seamless transition, but he's also not forced to be thrusted into the flames, as Goff could handle this year as a starter and be moved on from next year. Levis really did struggle this past year, but to be fair, he was dealing with turf toe and one of the worst situations in all of college football, as Kentucky had basically no talent around him, and he was continually being faced up against some of the best teams in college. So I think it's fair to defer to his last year tape, meaning the year before this previous season, as he did look like a slam dunk first rounder at quarterback. The board shaped out really nicely for the Raiders here because they need defensive back help in the worst way, and they could either go Devon Witherspoon or Christian Gonzalez. And I would say I slightly prefer Witherspoon just because his past year in college was some of the best tape I've seen from a college corner. He's just so physical, both as a run defender, but also as a press guy. And though he doesn't have that athletic ceiling that Gonzalez does, I could see him very easily being a quick riser in the NFL and being great in his rookie year. Speaking of Christian Gonzalez, he's going to be the pick for Atlanta here, and I would really love to see how their young trio of corners looks moving forward, because AJ Terrell is a bona fide number one corner. They just traded for a top 5 pick from Detroit, who, yeah, he's disappointed to this point, but at the end of the day, the talent is still there. And Gonzalez is, if not the best player, he's very close to being the best player still left on the board. So I think the value is there as well. They also have Casey Hayward, but he is in the twilight of his career. So I like planning for the future a bit. Peter Skoronski is going to be the pick at number 9, and I am a bit worried about his 32-inch arms, but we don't have to look past Northwestern beyond Rashawn Slater to see another tackle that had short arms succeed. And I don't see why Peter Skoronski couldn't be another success story like that, because he has great feet, he's gotten a lot stronger recently, and he's just a really good technician. So I think he makes a lot of sense for the Bears. I think their offensive line would actually be quite good if he can succeed at tackle as well. And that's really nice because it gives Justin Fields no excuses not to succeed. So it'll be great to see the new look Bears moving forward. With the Eagles' first pick, I have them taking Jackson Smith-Njigba, and he is just great for so many reasons, as I think he's probably the best player on the board right now. If not, he's very close. The Eagles can stand to pass a lot more, as they ranked 24th in pass attempts this past year. And Devonta Smith is also going to be needing a contract extension soon. So if they aren't able to afford him, Jackson Smith-Njigba could possibly be the cheaper replacement. If nothing else, though, they're going to have an elite top 3 at the very least trio of receivers, and Njigba can just slot in, pun unintended, right into the slot without having to change anyone else's position. Though PFF is rather low on him, I really like Paris Johnson to the Titans, as they need offensive line help, and he arguably has the highest ceiling out of any of the linemen, and he really fits nicely with their wide zone scheme because he can get out in space and just maul people. So I think he makes a lot of sense in a number of ways. And he's also ranked as the 10th best player on the consensus board, which I defer to a little bit more in general than I do the PFF board. The slide for Tyree Wilson ends at number 12 as he's going to stay in Texas. And the only reason he fell as much as he did is I didn't love some of the landing spots for him, and I personally don't see him as this can't miss prospect because he's an athletic freak for sure, but he didn't have quite as much success in college as I would like to see from somebody that's just much more athletic than the competition. But I love him in Houston because D'Amico Ryans can get the absolute most out of him, and if he reaches his potential, he's going to be a premier edge rusher that can also play inside for years to come. I'll admit this one's a bit weird for the Jets, but I really like Lucas Van Ness, and I think he has positional versatility to play inside or outside. And I also think the same could be said about John Franklin Myers, who is already on the Jets roster. So between the two of them, I think one of them will be able to play in the interior, and that's a pretty glaring need for the Jets. So though Van Ness is listed as an edge rusher, he may end up being an interior player, and I think he could be a great one. It's a match made in heaven for the Patriots and Joey Porter Jr. because the Patriots really need a corner, and Porter Jr. is an absolute press demon. So I can see Bill Belichick getting the most out of him and helping Porter maximize his gifts as a press corner to just completely erase receivers. At 15, I have Quentin Johnston going to the Packers, and they really need another receiver beyond Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. And Johnston seems to fit in really nicely with them because he can be another outside receiver, but he's not going to overlap too much in skill set as he's a great run after catch guy, and I think he could be a great contested catch guy as well. So I think he fits in nicely with Watson being that great deep threat and Doubs being kind of a master of all. So I think they can do some pretty nice things. For Washington, I owe ThatFranchiseGuy a shout out because he put this on my mind. Deonte Banks makes a ton of sense because he's first and foremost just an elite athlete that is worth the pick by himself because he's so talented, but he also fits their scheme very nicely because Ron Rivera likes his quarters coverages, and Deonte Banks is a great zone cover instinctual player that just fits the bill perfectly. PFF sees this as a bit of a reach, but I'm a pretty big fan of Broderick Jones. He just has some of the best power you'll ever see from a tackle, and his mentality matches it as well. And I'd say tackle is a pretty big need for the Steelers. It's not live or break with them, but I think it's among their biggest needs, as evident by PFF listing it as their first need. And really, I think they could use a primarily run blocker as well because the rest of their pass protection is actually pretty solid. If you look at the interior, and Chukuma Okorafor or Dan Moore could be replaced here. So I really like what Broderick Jones brings to them as he gives them a great run blocker and somebody that can grow into a really nice pass protector as well. Kalijah Kancey could be the missing piece for the Detroit Lions defensive line, as between Aiden Hutchinson, Pascal, and Aleem McNeil, they have the foundation of a really solid line, but they could use another interior rusher, and that's Cansey to a T. He's not going to wow you with his run defense, but McNeil is a good enough run defender in his own right that he'll be able to take on double teams and allow Cansey to only be single blocked, which, for as light as he is, he's actually not really a bad run defender one-on-one either, but he is just an absolute star as a pass rusher and could be honestly one of the best interior rushers when it's all said and done with his career. At 19, we have one of my draft crushes being Brian Branch, and he's such a good fit with Tampa because he's either going to be a great slot corner or a great safety, and Tampa really needs both of those positions filled, so I could see a world in which early on in his career even, he's going to be moving around between the two positions, and I don't see why he couldn't play both at an elite level, honestly. He's just such a good chess piece in the sense that he's got the coverage skills of a slot corner, but he's also got the tackling of a real box safety, and he has the awareness of a great player at both instances. Although his athleticism is a bit lacking, he more than makes up for it with his great intellect. For Seattle, I have them doubling down on the defensive line and drafting Nolan Smith, who is a little bit undersized as an edge rusher, but you would never know it based on how well he plays the run. And between him and Nwosu, they just might have the most athletic edge duo in all of the NFL. So their entire defensive line between Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter is going to be a breath of fresh air for a position that really needs. The Chargers are an incredibly difficult team to pick for because they really have minimal needs, but one position they could use help at is the interior defensive line, as Sebastian Joseph Day had a really pedestrian year this past season, and he's never really been much of a pass rusher either. And that's where Brzee comes in because his game is being an elite pass rusher. And I would say he has a ton of untapped potential still left that can be used from refinement. So if he continues to improve with the tutelage of good interior players, he could really be an uplifting factor for their defensive line. This is another one that PFF doesn't love, but I'm pretty high on Jordan Addison because the way he wins in college is a great way to win in the pros as well, meaning he's just very shifty and knows how to run his routes into open space against both man corners and zone coverage. He does have a bit of a size concern as he is barely 170 pounds, but I don't see why he couldn't add weight, and I think he could be among the best receivers for the Ravens day one, and I think he could be the best by the end of the season, honestly. And with Odell only being on a 1-year deal, I think it makes a ton of sense as well to guarantee yourself someone for the long term. This may be a slight reach, but I like Zay Flowers to the Vikings because he's an absolute jitterbug with the ball in his hands and has the speed to be a deep field threat as well, which really pairs nicely with Justin Jefferson, who can just do everything. So I like the addition for them, and really, I think there are some better players available, but they're at positions where the Vikings are already good at, and it would be very hard for the rookie to conceivably get time in the near future. It's also pretty important because I think they're going to be moving on from Kirk Cousins sooner rather than later, and it's going to be hard to evaluate a young quarterback that doesn't have a receiver beyond Justin Jefferson. Despite spending a first on Kayvon Chaisson, the Jaguars really need an edge rusher opposite Josh Allen, and that's where Myles Murphy comes in, who is an athletic specimen in his own right and could really learn a lot from Josh Allen, as far as it goes for the fundamentals of being an edge rusher. Murphy right now is pretty much just a power rusher, and he definitely has the body to succeed with that moving forward, but he could use a lot of refinement, and I think he could get that from Josh Allen, who's similarly raw coming out, but has become all that he could possibly be as a star edge rusher. The Giants still need receiver help even after putting a ton of resources into that position in free agency. And all of the quote unquote receivers worth taking in the first round are gone. But Dalton Kincaid is still available. And I think he's really a tight end in name alone, as I see him more as a large slot, which is again a position the Giants have put a lot of resources into. But I don't really feel comfortable with Jamison Crowder at this point, or even a Paris Campbell as a slot option. I do, however, feel great about Dalton Kincaid and Darren Waller being their versions of slot receivers, as I think they both present unique difficulties for coverage players, and I think they could really be a headache for defense. And just like that, all of a sudden there's a run on tight ends because Dallas's only real weakness, I would say, is at the tight end position, and Michael Mayer should be a great day one starter, even at a position that's typically rather intensive for young players to develop at. And just as a little side note, Michael Mayer has received some comparisons to Jason Witten, so I think this is even a better fit. Here at 27, we have Darnell Wright going to the Bills. And to be completely honest, I'm not super sold on Wright, but I think he can be an upgrade over Spencer Brown pretty much as soon as he enters the NFL. As a lot of what you could say about Brown, you could say about Wright, meaning they're both freakish athletes, but really with Wright, he just seems like he's more refined than Brown is, even though Brown's been in the league for 2 years already. So I like to protect Josh Allen here and hopefully get the offense to be a little less one-dimensional moving. At 28, Bijan Robinson finally stops his slide and goes to the Bengals, who I think should move on from Joe Mixon when they can, because Mixon is really facing a lot of light boxes and just not succeeding with any sort of regularity. And I think that's where Robinson would just shine, because in college he was seeing rather heavy boxes most of the time, and he was still just a complete unstoppable machine. And I think if you give him some passing support, and also their offensive line is not going to be good, but I actually don't think it's going to be too much of an issue now that they have Orlando Brown. So I could see them being a very good two-dimensional team moving forward with Bijan Robinson. Emmanuel Forbes is another one of my draft crushes, and I do realize that he is very much on the skinny side for a corner, but I don't think it's ridiculous to expect him to add 10 pounds to his frame. And even right now, he's had a lot of success playing press man, which will only be tougher in the NFL as the athletes become bigger, faster, and stronger. But I don't see why he couldn't succeed there as he continues to develop his frame. And his ball skills are incredible and exactly what defensive coordinators look for in the modern NFL. So I think he's a good fit for New Orleans because he will be playing press, but he'll also just be playing off man as well. And I think he can succeed in both facets. Here, the Eagles again torment me, as their great management makes me really want to not fail. And I think the best player to do that is Will McDonald, as they are good on the edge position with Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick and Brandon Graham, but Graham is very old at this point, and Sweat and Reddick are both going to need new contracts soon. So you might as well plan for the future some and get Will McDonald. I think both Sweat and Graham can play inside a little bit as well. And with McDonald, his main issue is he's not very refined at this point. But who better to learn from than the edge group the Eagles have right now? And if he can't succeed with that, I just don't think he would ever succeed in the NFL. And lastly, we have the defending Super Bowl champs, Kansas City Chiefs. And they have a really fortunate break here, as I think Lucas Niang is better suited as a backup tackle, and Anton Harrison just falls into their lap as a great pass protector that is not much of a run blocker, but he's going to have a ton of help with a great interior part of the offensive line. And also, Kansas City is really not trying to run the ball anyways, so I think his deficiencies will be fine, and his skills will be really applauded in Kansas City. So I think that's a great move for Kansas City. So here you can see every pick that was made. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments section below. And also, please be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more NFL content and content on the NBA playoffs as well.